First of all, what is your reaction to this executive order by the president, which would force or direct federal regulators to reconsider this Communications Decency Act, this particular section which protects online companies from content that their users post?
Well, I think it really seems quite slapped together. It's very reactive. It's really interesting to see this come about where the trigger, the precipitating factor was a fact check. This is not about censorship. Nothing was taken down. Nobody was put in timeout. No tweets were deleted. This is in response to a fact check. And it's just kind of dredging up something that had come up previously 6 months ago. And it's kind of an ongoing cycle in which it just pops up every now and then whenever the president feels that tech has done something bad to him.
Now, there's a divergence in how social media companies are handling the president's speech, political speech. Of course, you've got Twitter fact-checking a couple of tweets by the president. You've got Mark Zuckerberg out there saying that companies shouldn't be the arbiters of truth. Facebook doesn't fact-check political speech. Who's right in terms of how they're handling this?
Well, I mean, I think there's different spectrums for different platforms and how the dynamics work. But ultimately, what Zuckerberg is saying is that they're not going to fact-check political speech directly, as in on the candidates' posts themselves or the candidates' ads, but Facebook absolutely fact checks and has been doing so for years. And it does so in recognition of the fact that misinformation can be very harmful, particularly in very narrowly tailored areas like stuff related to the pandemic or stuff related to voter suppression. So Twitter has taken the approach of saying they have that same kind of narrow tailoring, but they are in fact appending it directly to the president's tweets. And that's where the real difference is. It feels a little bit like splitting hairs, I think, for most people. But again, you know, Facebook is also fact checking.
Right. So is that statement by Mark Zuckerberg misleading?
I couldn't tell. I wondered if maybe it was like a weird cut of a longer interview and something else was going to come out. I actually really couldn't gauge it because they absolutely do fact check. They have a team of fact checking partners, in fact, recognizing that harmful misinformation and misleading commentary going viral on the platform in 2016 was impactful.
Now, what about Twitter? Obviously, they've now fact-checked a couple of the president's tweets, but I mean, to be fair, of everything that the president has tweeted, fact-checking just a couple, should Twitter be doing more?
I think that they legitimately don't want to wade into fact-checking every single thing that every single politician says, and I think that's reasonable. I think the ones that you want to fact-check are ones where the statement has some kind of weight. So something related to misinformation around voting or misinformation related to health. Those are the two areas that they've identified as bright lines, and that's because there's some sort of harm that comes from misinformation in that regard. If people have bad information about where to go vote, whether they can have absentee ballots, you know, any range of things related to voting, or false cures, quack cures, that kind of thing with regard to COVID-19, that can have really bad impacts directly on people's lives, and that's what they're trying to deal with.
What about false accusations of, you know, potentially being connected to a death that there's no evidence that you're connected to?
That cycle's 24 whole hours old now, right? And I think that didn't get fact-checked, as I recall, because that didn't fall into the realm of either information around health or information about voting. So we have, again, these very narrowly tailored areas. The 12 hours before the offending voting tweets were fact-checked and triggered this entire, storm. Again, as you mentioned, blatant misinformation was left up unchecked. And that angered a lot of people on the other side. So really, I think you have a real debate among the public where there's just very divergent views of how much platforms should be doing and how far they should go.
Now, all of this is ramping up before a critical election. Do you think the platforms are vulnerable of being politically weaponized to the extent that it would undermine the election despite the moves that they're making?
I think that there's a very real risk in misinformation going viral on election day and election night. Yes, I think that this is one of the reasons why the platforms are prioritizing developing infrastructure to label tweets and things like this in May so that they're not caught flat-footed in November. We spent a lot of time over 3 years now talking about what happens with foreign disinformation, but the problem with the social media ecosystem is that information moves very fast. Things go viral very quickly. It doesn't matter who creates them, really. And so you just have the kind of bright line takedowns around things like Russia just don't really apply when it's the president himself or domestic activists or influencers doing the commentary.
So what can and should these companies do? It's not just Facebook and Twitter, but also potentially Google and YouTube would be impacted. What can and should companies do about this executive order?
Really, with the executive order, I think a lot of it is going to be challenged in court. I mean, my understanding from following the lawyers that I pay attention to is that there are a lot of things that are just not going to stick. So I think that the executive order is less of a concern, and they should just continue thinking about what their policies should be in service to making sure that the American people are informed, particularly as we have a critical election coming up.
Now, given that we're in the middle of a pandemic and we're seeing these companies still fight misinformation about COVID-19 specifically, how well do you think they're actually doing?
I think that they've had a lot of real challenges with this, in part because, again, this is the other interesting piece. There is a desire to elevate authoritative voices. And what we've seen with this particular pandemic is that sometimes authoritative voices don't know what's going on. We've seen health authorities be slow to react. We've seen government authorities state misleading information, not only in the US, excuse me, but overseas as well. So the platforms really have a unique challenge of trying to figure out what kind of expertise to surface. And that is I think that is the real debate that is underlying both of these issues. How should the platforms curate? What should they surface? And unfortunately, that debate, particularly in the US, is highly, highly politicized at this point.